All right, so we're still working with coordinate plane. Hopefully you feel really good about how to use the coordinate plane and plot points and find locations. Now we're going to move on to distance. So what do you do if the question says, how far apart are these 2 points? Yes, you could plot them and then just count the squares between the 2 points, but that's kind of the long way. Takes a little bit more time because if they don't give you a coordinate plane, then you have to draw it and then count the points and stuff. So like that takes a lot of time, but it works. So if that's what you're comfortable with, then please definitely do that. What I'm saying is, for example, this is an old worksheet, so just ignore all the writing, but like if they said, what's the distance between the Ferris wheel and the roller coaster? I know it's hard for you to see, but you could count 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 lines in between the Ferris wheel and the roller coaster. So the distance is 4. But what they'll do is every time they ask you, they're going to be on the same line. So what I mean by that is they're going to be vertical of each other, or like they will be side to side. So like this is another one that they might ask. Okay, they're going to be on the same line. Does that make sense? Whereas they wouldn't ask you how far apart are the bumper cars and the roller coaster, because you can tell those are diagonal. Okay, we don't really do that in 6th grade. It will be something that you do eventually, but not in 6th grade. Same thing, like they wouldn't say, what's the distance between the roller coaster and the water slide? They would not ask you to count diagonally like that, okay? So anytime they ask you what's the distance, it's going to be something that's a straight line, whether it's an up and down straight line or side to side straight line. All right, so yes, you could count your squares and find the distance, but there is a different way to do it. If the points are in the same quadrant, subtract the absolute values. Okay, I'm going to do an example, of course, but let me just write the next sentence. If the points are in different quadrants, add the absolute values. Okay, and the reason we're talking about absolute value again is because remember, excuse me, we're talking about distance, okay? Remember, distance can never be negative, okay? But remember, in some of your ordered pairs, you definitely have negative numbers, because remember, if you go left, it's negative, or if you go down, it's negative. But remember, distance can't be negative. So when we're talking about distance, we're just going to kind of ignore the negative signs, because distance can't be negative. So therefore, it doesn't matter to us whether it's negative or positive. It matters more so what quadrant is located in, okay? So if they're in the same quadrant, you're going to subtract. If they're in different quadrants, you're going to add, okay? So you're going to have one ordered pair over here, one ordered pair over here. If they're in different quadrants, you're going to add them, but if they're in the same quadrant, you're going to subtract them, okay? So let's look at some examples real quick. Oh, wrong way. So you can kind of understand what I'm talking about. Right? And the question is always going to be something like, find the distance between, and we'll just put dot, 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 because we're going to do several examples, okay? So our first one is, let me give you the point 6, -5, and 10, -5. All right. So one thing that they're they're always going to give for you is that they're going to give you one number that's always the same. Okay. So they're going to give you every single time. Like I can't say every and always very often in math, but every single time they're going to give you one number that's going to be identical. So like for this one, it's going to be in the same spot. It's going to be the same exact number. So for this one, that number is obviously -5. Let me get a different color. So what you do is you don't need that number, because remember, I told you it's going to be on a straight line. So this is how you know it's on a straight line, because one of the numbers is the same. So we're just going to cross it out because we don't need it. I don't need a number that's the same. Okay, I care about the numbers that are different. All right. So the next thing we want to do is let's figure out what quadrant they're in. Okay. This one is positive, negative. So think about it. If you're positive, you're negative. Positive means you're going right. Then the second number being negative means you're going down. So this would be Q4. Okay. Same thing here. My first one's positive. My second one's negative. So that's Q4. And, really, you don't even really need, if you're not very good at figuring out which quadrant it's in, you can really just look at the signs. Positive, negative, positive, negative. If they're the exact same signs, they're in the same quadrant. Okay. So these are the same quadrant. So what's that mean? Well, if I go back to the top where we started our notes, if they're in the same quadrant, you're supposed to subtract. Okay. All right. So you're going to subtract them. All right. Put the bigger number first. All right. Make life easy for yourself. Yes, I know that this one comes first, but just put the bigger one first. Okay. So the absolute value of 10 minus the absolute value of 6. All I'm doing is taking the two numbers in each of these points and I'm going to subtract them. Why am I subtracting them? Because remember, they're in the same quadrant. If they're in the same quadrant, you subtract. Okay. So now I'm just doing 10 minus 6, which is 4. So my distance is 4 units apart. So these 2 points on a coordinate plane are 4 units apart. All right, let's look at another one. This one we're going to say 3, -3, and -8, -3. Okay, so once again, let's go ahead and get rid of that number that I don't need at all. Okay, what number is the exact same and it's in the exact same spot? Well, here I've got 3, -8. Those aren't the same, but the second numbers are both -3. So I'm going to cross those off because I don't need them. Okay. Now let's look at where these points are located. Okay. This one is positive, negative. This one's negative, negative. So once again, even if I don't know what quadrant they're in, I can already tell they're in different quadrants because the signs are different. Okay. But just so that you know, positive, negative means it's Q4. Negative, negative means it's Q3. So that shows you that, yes, they are in different quadrants. Okay. Now, according to my notes at the top, if they're in different quadrants, I'm supposed to add them. So technically, if you're adding them, it doesn't matter which one comes first, because remember, addition, it's commutative. You can do whichever one first. Okay. So absolute value of 3 plus the absolute value of -8. And I guess I should have written this up here. So this was 10 and this was 6. So same thing here. What's the absolute value of 3? It's 3. What's the absolute value of 8? It's 8. So 3 plus 8 gives me 11. So my distance here is 11. Okay, let's try another one. Really the main goal here is figuring out if they're in the same or different quadrants. Once you know that, then you can really just add or subtract to figure out what you're supposed to do. All right, next one is 10, 6. And the other one is 10, -8. All right, so once again, they're going to give you a point that's the same, or are they going to give you one number that's the same? So which number is the exact same in the exact same spot? And that would be 10. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of it because I don't need it. Okay, and then let's see what quadrant they're in. This one is positive, positive. So that would be quadrant 1. Okay, this one is positive, negative. So that would be quadrant 4. Okay, different quadrants. One's in 1, one's in 4, so they're in different quadrants. So now I need to realize that since they're in different quadrants, I'm going to add. So I'm going to take the absolute value of 6 plus absolute value of -8. The absolute value of 6, absolute value of -8 is 8. So 6 plus 8 is just going to leave you with 14. Okay, let's do 2 more. All right, let me turn this a little bit. Number 4. -5, -7. And -5, -13. Okay. Which number's in the exact same spot and the exact same number? That's obviously the -5, so I'm going to cross those off. I don't need them. All right. This one is negative, negative, so that tells me it has to be quadrant 3. This one's negative, negative, so that's also quadrant 3. So they are in the same quadrant. If they're in the same quadrant, you subtract them. So let's look at which one's bigger. I've got a 13, I've got a 7, so let's do 13 first. And this one's -7. All right, so the absolute value of -13 is 13. Absolute value of -7 is 7. So 13 minus 7 is going to leave me with 6. Okay, and I guess I should have said this back at the beginning. Remember, absolute value is how many jumps it takes to get there. So if you're standing on 0, how many jumps does it take to get to -13? It takes me 13 jumps, okay? All right, one more. Let's do 0, 8, and 10, 8. Okay. So now what's the number that they have in common? That's going to be the 8, so I'm going to cross it off. Okay. So this one can be tricky for some people because technically this number or this ordered pair right here is not in a quadrant. It's on an axis. Okay. But if it's on an axis and this one's not on an axis, then therefore they're in different sections or different areas, whatever you want to call it. But also, if you think about it, this one is 10 and 0. So think about it. If you have 10 and 0, if you have 10 plus 0, you're going to get 10. If you have 10 minus 0, you're going to get 10. Okay? So when it's a 0, it doesn't really matter as much, but we'll still go ahead and talk about it. So this one, 0, 8, that's going to be on the y-axis. 10, 8 is going to be in Q1. So technically, I like to say that these are in different quadrants because the only way they could be the same is if this one was also on the y-axis. But since it's not, we're going to say they're in different quadrants. So absolute value of 0, is still 0, but we'll put it plus the absolute value of 10. So like we said, this is 0, this is 10. So my distance is still going to be 10. Okay? So like I said, the main point of this lesson is finding which quadrant they're in and then knowing if you need to add or subtract. Same quadrant, you subtract. If they're in different quadrants, you add them. Okay, and remember, you're always going to find the absolute value because distance can't be negative. Okay?